Well, that was quite amazing, wasn't it? John opens up and says, exciting day ahead, and we're starting with the lawyer. How life changes. So if I can have the, oh, there we go, we're up. So yeah, and the other big shock for me at least was 15 minutes to speak. I mean, for a lawyer, we hardly get through working out how to approach Article 1 of something in 15 minutes. Let alone anything else. So with that in mind, I'm going to scoot through quite a few things. I know there's a varied amount of experience and expertise in front of us. So what I want to do is just to throw in certain topics which will hopefully some will be new to quite a few of you and give you something to think about during the course of the rest of the day. So why on earth are we here, apart from the fact that we want to get away from the kids or whatever it was and get out earlier this morning? Well, data is very much the new oil. So if you look on the left-hand side of the screen here, you'll see back about 10 or so years ago, most of the world's largest companies were oil-based. And then since then, you can see there's an awful lot of blue on the right-hand side. So that is signifying that we're into an age where data companies are now the largest sort of companies in the world. So data is very much the new oil. And that's why we've had so much talk about GDPR, because we've got to start looking at how this sort of stuff is regulated. So some very key issues to start with. We've obviously seen the rise of e-commerce. But with that, it's not just the good guys who are getting into e-commerce, but it's the dark side as well. So what we're seeing more and more of is the rise of the e-criminal, to the extent that cybercrime has now become the world's fastest growing crime, and it's already overtaken global drug trafficking as the world's sort of most key offence. So everything which we are putting online, guess what the criminals are doing as well. So it's not just fraud, it's getting into cyber fraud. It's not just laundering, it's cyber laundering. It's not just organised crime, it's cyber organised crime. It's not just cyber market abuse, it's cyber market abuse. Everything is going online in the dark world as well. So if we get the periscope up and have a look at the threats which all companies are facing from the dark side out there, and gaze through that, I've highlighted cybercrime in the middle because it's very much the leading threat. Do not ignore the rest, though. Some of that is still carrying on offline, and abusers are everywhere. Here's another reason why you need to pay attention, particularly if you are like an SME, or even some certain large companies have suffered this as well. So the research from Gartner is that 80% of those who hit a major cyber issue are dead in 2 years. Don't go and recheck your life policy. It's more the corporate death rather than individual death at the moment, thankfully. But let's see what happens in the future. At policy level, when we're looking at cybercrime, a lot of people just say, well, you know, we know about cyber criminals, and they just talk about as if there's just one kind of criminal. We tend to divide it up into 5 key types. At the top there, the euphemistic advanced persistent threats. Governments, we all know who they are, but actually they are friendly as well as unfriendly, who have got quite a bit of capability. Cyber espionage, I put that up not because Edward Snowden is speaking later today and we're going to get into a bit of James Bond sort of approach to this conference maybe, but because cyber espionage is not really a very sexy issue, but covers an awful lot of unsexy kind of issues which have dramatic consequences. So it includes things like losing employee data or disgruntled employees moving off to another firm and taking your client lists with them. That's what we mean by cyber espionage in the legal world. Your hacktivists, you know, the criminals, I've said, are getting better at it, and the cyber terrorists have developed a huge capability from nowhere. So already able to intercept drone attacks, already able to get onto things like US Central Command website. I think that's pretty cool, and so do they. So there we go, there's a cyber espionage list of all the sort of different bits which we look upon it from a lawyer's perspective of cyber espionage. Do take note and do prepare and protect. And just to make sure that you're aware that it's not just here in the UK, Allianz, this is Germany's largest insurance company, probably Europe's largest, does an annual survey of the top 10 business risks, and you'll see there that cybercrime, IT failure and so on, data breach is in at number 2. If you look at this survey from about 5 years ago, it wasn't even in the top 10. So you can see how much and how fast this is creeping up the list of issues. And then in the UK, it's already at number 1. So really dramatic. We do need to pay a lot of attention to this. We are starting to do so. I was very glad to see one of my acquaintances from law enforcement as soon as I walked in this morning. Law enforcement capability in this country is growing, but it does need some support. So do make sure you pass that on. World Economic Forum, global risks of highest concerns. This is actually a little bit dated because this is a 2016 chart. I haven't seen a chart produced for any later years. But you can see there the countries in purple, so US, Japan, Singapore, for example, Germany, Netherlands, are all countries where cyber is the highest risk for the country, let alone certain companies operating within it. And 3 years later, there will be, in my estimation, a few more purple countries up there. So key trends, this sort of comes out of a talk I heard from somebody who came from Cheltenham the other day. So we know it's obviously true. 317 million new pieces of malware created last year. That's nearly 1 million new pieces of malware every single day. That's just an extraordinary sort of level of threat. Most of us are sort of complaining about the traffic out here and the state of the roads and a few potholes. Blimey, this is nothing compared to the digital road where there are potholes everywhere. You don't really know where you're going. Anybody can put up a signpost, and guess what? The digital road is full of highwaymen who make Dick Turpin look quite a mild, sort of nice character you'd have around to dinner, really. So you've got this rise in volume of attack, and you've got a big rise in sophistication as well. Partly this is due to various governments developing some pretty amazing kit, and then because of a process of deniability, which they want to watch out for, they are leaking that kit out onto the dark web, and guess what? It gets snapped up at bargain basement prices by organised crime groups, and all to protect somebody from trying to work out where on earth this particular attack has come from when it's an APT, an advanced persistent threat attack, that you're receiving. We seem to be developing into a couple of digital hemispheres here, and this is structurally quite interesting, to me at least. So you've seen we've got no real European digital sort of champion companies, and whenever we get one like autonomy, it gets snapped up quickly by somebody in the US. So an awful lot of the European sort of companies are basically, on the digital side, it's all American. And we've got a big, and of course over in the Americas, it's very much the US companies which prevail. Over in Asia though, and particularly in China, none of that at all, which was a bit disappointing for my daughters when they got over into Beijing summer before last, and found that various apps that they loved using were quite difficult to access. But you can see there that we've got very much two digital hemispheres growing up in commercial sort of terms. The laws in New York, California are new, not particularly developed. Same in China and Singapore, but of course the one that we've heard of is GDPR, and GDPR has global effect. It's quite extraordinary. There were more conferences on GDPR last year in the US than there were in the UK. I find that quite unbelievable. We have tried to work out how are we going to approach global cybersecurity. So there's a global cybersecurity index, and you'll see there that there are 5 pillars, and reassuringly from my personal perspective, that one of those is legal. Yes, whoops, I probably need to go back to that. One of those is legal, but actually within that umbrella of legal comes training, which is quite unusual. I would have thought that would be sort of like a separate pillar which would cover different kinds of cybersecurity issues. So remember that cybersecurity is not just a technical issue, it's legal, it's organisational, that's very important. It needs to get into the boardroom. Capacity building and cooperation as well. David Cameron, a few years ago, when we had this massive cyber conference in London, said, we want the UK to be the best at cyber and the best at cyber security. We're actually on number 5 on this EU member state list. Maybe that's a reason for Brexit. We can be number 1 somewhere. So what has my task force been focusing on? What we did was to ask the major banks around Europe what they wanted us to cover. We came up with 3 core themes, and we think this applies at organisational, international and national level, and at the level of companies as well. And certainly all the people that I've been advising so far, governance, risk management and capability are the 3 key watchwords that you need to take back and make sure are instilled into your company. And if those are the only 3 things that you've ever had free from a lawyer, especially this morning, do make sure that you take those back. Those are just absolutely vital. So there is a report out there. You can get hold of it. You can just drop me a business card afterwards. I'll send it to you. So I haven't brought it with me or put it on the conference website yet, but maybe we can do that afterwards. So those are the sorts of things that we were covering there, and you can see a lot of those are more sort of legislative, regulatory, policy sort of slanted rather than technical. Haven't got time to go into those in greater detail today, but here's incident reporting requirements. It's not just GDPR. There are 6 different levels, and believe you me, when you look at the incident reporting stuff, it's quite complex because there you go, there's the fragmentation, which shows you all the different requirements about what you put in the report, when you have to put it in, and so on and so forth. So you need another program just to cope with the incident reporting. Key practical considerations. I think most of those are fairly obvious when it comes to incident reporting. Cybersecurity compliance. A lot of people are saying, well, yeah, let's make sure we are compliant. But being compliant doesn't kill your risk. So never underestimate the creativity of the criminal, the aggression of the attacker, the naivety of staff. Because it doesn't matter how compliant you are, being compliant does not get rid of your risk. I always say focus on what your risk is first, get rid of that if you can, and then make sure that whatever you've done to do that, hopefully that will cure the compliance stuff. Here we go. Here's another, both John and I are military sort of background people, and 3 lines of defence. Hurrah! Here's Topolchani Castle, one of the best examples of defence anywhere in Europe, classical castle defence. And this has been translated into business sort of concepts. So IT and business are the first, the outer wall, risk, compliance and legal, inner wall, and internal audit sitting in the keep. Don't do this in your companies, will you? It doesn't work. Nobody builds castles anymore apart from Walt Disney. What you need to do is a concept like this. And I've just taken a Russian integrated air defense system. But there are other military systems that I could use. And what it is about basically is thinking of all the assets you've got in terms of cybersecurity, working out how you can use them, integrate them all together, and use them actively, aggressively, not as 3 lines of defense, please. The reason this is so effective, this is what Syria did. We haven't been able to do much in Syria. We've had to fly around all these these missile defense systems. Iraq didn't have any of these, and it was open season. So it is very effective as a concept. Cybersecurity predictions for 2019, quite a few of those. We've already started to see some GDPR pain settling in. There will be some new laws on the way. We can't have a digital highway on which so much business depends with so little in the way of regulation and enforcement. So lots of different things there, which if I had the rest of the day, I would talk to you in greater detail. Brexit impact, oh God. I was going to relabel this slide on the way in this morning as Burko impact and talk about something else slightly, but yes, let's maybe it will become clearer in 2 weeks' time. It's not always about the dumb user. There's a lot of IT people here who say, oh yeah, the biggest problem in any of this sort of stuff is the human, by which they mean the idiot who's sitting there typing with one finger on each side. Well, it's not just about that sort of person, actually. It's about the person who's programmed who's put the software together, for example, as I would venture to say we might have seen in the Boeing incidents. So we've had a lot of talk about driverless cars, and I thought, well, okay, who would I like mine programmed by? Would I like it programmed by somebody like the warden on Dad's Army, which would be probably a safe bit of a drive, but deadly boring, and I'm bound to be asleep by the time I get to the destination? Would I like a bit more of a racy drive and have it programmed by the Stig? Would I like it programmed by a guy who actually went to the same school that I did, Bill Oddie? What Bill Oddie did on his last day of school was to divert the Bristol Road traffic, which is one of the main arteries into south of Birmingham, up the school road and then through the school. Which would have been quite a good policy if it were not for the fact that we have a few arches and double-decker buses and large lorries can't get under those, so it did create quite a bit of a drama. So you've got the people who are fooling around like they do on the internet, and then you've got the cyber terrorists. And driverless cars, of course, from their perspective, absolutely fantastic, because they just sort of pitch up, load it with some explosives, send it off. You don't even have to put your suicide belt on. Isn't that wonderful? And achieve your effect that way. For those of you who've got a problem in getting stuff through at board level and getting sign-off and approval, remember that it's not just about the cloud in IT terms, because every cloud obviously has a silver lining, and here's a bunch of things that you could mention to them. Next steps when you leave here, government, risk management, capability. Thank you very much.
Richard, thank you very much indeed. A very good insight into the landscape of cybersecurity threats and risks. I think two things came out of that from me, my point is 1 million pieces of new malware per day. That is quite scary, 1 million per day. And the other side issue of this and threats is the social media impact on our children. And we as mature adults must do everything we can to protect our children from exploitation through social media. And I know that's something you've been looking at, Richard. So thank you very much indeed, Richard. Good to see you again.